Hello, everyone. We are continuing our conversation of Chapter 1. Today, we're talking primarily about the nervous system and the skeletal system. Here we go. Although skeletal muscles produce the force that allow us to move, it is the nervous system that directs and controls the voluntary system. Automatically, the entire nervous system can be divided into the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system lies outside the central nervous system and may be further divided into motor or efferent and sensory, which is the afferent divisions. The motor branch of the peripheral nervous system relays nerve impulses from the central nervous system to the periphery or the skeletal muscles, while the sensory branch relays nerve impulses from the periphery back to the central nervous system. The nervous system has somatic or voluntary and autonomic or involuntary functions. The somatic nervous system is responsible for activating skeletal muscles, such as the rhythmic actions of the quadriceps femoris muscles during cycling. The autonomic nervous system controls involuntary functions, such as contraction of the heart and smooth muscle and blood vessels as well as glands. It is the flight or fight response of the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system that causes increased blood flow to the working skeletal muscles and increased sweating, which is necessary for proper body temperature regulation. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system supports the muscle actions initiated by the somatic nervous system. The parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is primarily active during rest. It is responsible for processes such as digestion, urination, and gland secretion. This is a schematic representation of a neuron, including its dendrites, the cell body, and axon. Now, neurons, also called nerve cells, are the fundamental units of the brain and nervous system. The cells responsible for receiving sensory input from the external world, for sending motor commands to our muscles, and for transforming and relaying the electrical signals at every step in between. More than that, the interactions define who we are as people. Having said that, our roughly 100 billion neurons do interact closely with other cell types, broadly classified as glia. These may actually outnumber neurons, although it's not really known. The creation of new neurons in the brain is called neurogenesis, and this can happen even in adults. That's really where a lot of our science now is going, is creating those new brain neurons. A useful analogy to think of a neuron as a tree. A neuron has three main parts: the dendrites, an axon, and a cell body or soma, which can be represented as the branch, roots, and trunk of a tree, respectively. A dendrite, which is the tree branch, is where neurons receive input from other cells. Dendrites branch as they move towards their tips, just like tree branches do, and they even have leaf-like structures on them called spines. The axon, or tree roots, is the output structure of the neuron. When a neuron wants to talk to another neuron, it sends an electrical message called an action potential throughout the entire axon. The soma, or tree trunk, is where the nucleus lies, where the neuron's DNA is housed, and where proteins are made to be transported throughout the axon and dendrites. There are different types of neurons, both in the brain and the spinal cord. They are generally divided according to where they originate, where they project to, and which neurotransmitters they use. So the axon, again, is the long, thin structure in which action potentials are generated, the transmitting part of the neuron. And after initiation, action potentials travel down axons to cause the release of a neurotransmitter. The dendrite is the receiving part of the neuron. The dendrites receive synaptic inputs from axons, with the sum total of the dendritic inputs determining whether the neuron will fire an action potential. And the spine is a small protrusion found on dendrites that are, for many synapses, the postsynaptic contract site. The action potential itself is a brief electrical event typically generated in the axon that signals the neuron is active. An action potential travels the length of the axon and causes release of neurotransmitter into the synapse. And the action potential and consequent transmitter release allow the neuron to communicate with other neurons. Now, sensory neurons convey information from the periphery, such as from the muscles and joints, back to the CNS. The two sensory structures with particular significance to exercise training are the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organ, or GTO. And here you see this is a picture that's looking at the location of a muscle spindle within the skeletal muscle. And then you also see the structure of a muscle spindle. The muscle spindles can be defined as small spindle-shaped sensory receptors that are located in skeletal muscle tissue, and they run parallel to the main muscle fibers. You can see that here, also called the extrafusal fibers. Now, a muscle spindle consists of several differentiated muscle fibers. The intrafusal fibers that are enclosed in a spindle-shaped connective tissue sac, and the ends of the intrafusal fibers are contractile, but the central portion is non-contractile and innervated by special neurons named gamma motor neurons. Muscle spindles are sensitive to both the phasic stretch, the rate at which a muscle stretches, and the tonic stretch, the extent to which the muscle is stretched. Stimulation of the muscle spindles elicits a contraction in the stretched muscle, or a myotactic reflex or stretch reflex, and at the same time inhibits action potentials to antagonistic muscles. Static stretching exercises are typically done in such a way as to avoid activation of the muscle spindles. Moving slowly into a stretched position prevents activation of the muscle spindle. Muscle spindles are mostly easily stretched when they are relaxed. There are other times when activation of the muscle spindle is desired during training. For example, plyometric and weightlifting exercises such as a snatch, clean and jerk, or etc. Jumping, swinging a bat or tennis racket, and kicking and punching are commonly performed by rapidly stretching the muscles involved, followed immediately by concentric action of the same muscle. This rapid stretch of the muscles will activate the stretch reflex, leading to a more powerful concentric action. Now, the structure of a Golgi tendon organ is what you see here at the very bottom of the picture. So the GTOs are proprioceptors that are located in the tendon adjacent to the myotendinous junction. So the muscle spindles in the belly of the muscle versus the GTO, which is at the end where it is connecting the muscle to the tendon. The Golgi tendon organ is a tree-like sensory ending enclosed in a spindle-like connective tissue. You can see that in C there. And that capsule lies near the junction of a tendon with a muscle. In contrast, to muscle spindles, the Golgi tendon organ lies in a series with skeletal muscle fibers and therefore discharges during passive stretching of the muscle, as well as when the tendon is stretched by the contraction of the muscle. Accordingly, the GTO is considered to be a muscle tension receptor rather than a muscle stretch receptor. These two feedback systems, both involving muscle afferents, regulate force and muscle length through reflexes. The muscle spindle afferents transduce or convert the message into another form, muscle length, whereas GTO's afferents transduce muscle force. GTOs lie in series with the extrafusal fibers and receive no motor innervation. They send force information to the spinal cord where interneurons receive input from the brain that specifies the amount of force that a muscle should produce. If that muscle's force level exceeds this set point, the GTO inputs inhibit the alpha motor neurons, innervating the muscle, which lowers the force produced, unless some other mechanism cancels that signal. This will lead to a relaxation of the acting muscle and stimulation of the antagonist muscle. The protective reflex prevents injury to the muscle and joint due to potentially excessive force of muscle action. For example, during a 1 repetition maximum, which is the heaviest weight that can be lifted at one time of a deadlift exercise, activation of the GTO may prevent a person from exerting themselves to the extent that muscles and associated connective tissues are damaged. Regular resistance training will strengthen the muscles and other tissues, while the GTO may have its sensitivity altered such that greater forces may be produced without initiating that inhibitory response. The motor unit is the smallest functional unit of the nervous system, and it can be regarded as the final output of motor commands. A motor unit consists of one alpha motor neuron and all the extrafusal muscle fibers it innervates. The number of these muscle fibers can vary from 1 to 2 to 1,000. If the number of muscle fibers innervated by a motor neuron is few, the motion produced by that muscle is more precise. In contrast to that, if the number of muscle fibers innervated by a motor neuron is high, the muscle produces gross movements. So the recruitment order of motor neurons depends on their size. That is, muscle fibers, which are the smallest and low force production capacity, are recruited first. This phenomenon is known as the Henneman size principle. When afferent signals from sensory systems reach to the central nervous system, the spinal cord can evoke a rapid response, which is called a reflex. That reflex pathways are responsible for two main functions in the human body. The first one is protect muscle from injury in case of instant and voluntary movements. The second one is to control fundamental rhythmic actions, which are initiated in higher brain centers. All fibers in a given motor unit are of the same fiber type. It is the motor neuron that gives the fibers their metabolic and contractile characteristics. Motor units may vary in the number of fibers innervated. Motor units in small muscles, such as those in the hand, have relatively few fibers. Larger muscles, such as those in the thigh, contain a large number of fibers per motor unit. The different muscle fiber types have distinct anatomical and physiological characteristics, which determine their functional capacities. We kind of talked about that a little bit. The force exerted by a muscle during a voluntary contraction depends on the number of motor units recruited for the action and the rate at which they discharge their action potentials, or rate coding, over most of the operating range of a muscle. The nervous system controls muscle force by varying both motor unit recruitment and rate coding, except at relatively low forces. However, the control of muscle force depends primarily on rate coding, especially during fast contractions. The size principle states that motor units will be recruited in order of size from the smallest to the largest, depending upon the intensity. When considering the various properties of the motor units, this makes sense. The small units don't produce much force. They are slow to act and they are resistant to fatigue. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the skeletal system. And you can see here the picture. It shows the front view and rear view of an adult male skeletal, human skeleton. The skeletal system works as a support structure for your body. It gives the body its shape. It allows movement, makes blood cells, provides protection for organs, and stores minerals. Now, the skeletal system is your body's central framework. It consists of bones, connective tissue, including cartilage, tendons, and ligaments. It's also called the musculoskeletal system. The skeletal system is a network of many different parts that work together to help you move. The main part of your skeleton system consists of bones, hard structures that create your body's framework, the skeleton. There are 206 bones in an adult human skeleton. The other components of your skeletal system include cartilage, which is the smooth and flexible substance that covers the tips of your bones where they meet. It enables the bones to move without friction or rubbing against each other. When cartilage wears away, as in arthritis or as we get older, it can be painful and can cause movement problems. Joints is where those two or more bones in the body come together. There are three different joint types. The types are immovable joints. These immovable joints don't let the bones move at all, like the joints between your skull bones. The partly movable joints allow limited movement, such as the joints in your rib cage. And you have movable joints, which allow a wide range of motion. Your elbow, shoulder, and knee are all movable joints. The ligaments are bands of strong connective tissue that hold the bones together. Now, tendons are bands of tissue that connect the ends of a muscle to your bone. Here you see the anatomy of a long bone. The skeletal system has many functions. Besides giving us human shape and features, it allows movements. It supports your body weight to help you stand and move. The joints, connective tissue, and muscles work together to make your body parts mobile. It produces blood cells. Bones contain bone marrow. Red and white blood cells are produced in that bone marrow. It protects and supports organs. Your skull shields your brain. Your ribs protect your heart and lungs, and your backbone protects your spine. It stores minerals. The bones hold your body's supply of minerals like calcium and vitamin D. Now, each bone has three main layers. The periosteum is a tough membrane that covers and protects the outside of the bone, where compact bone, which is below the periosteum, is white, hard, and smooth. It provides structural support and protection. The spongy bone, or the core, which is the inner layer of the bone, is softer than compact bone. It has small holes called pores that store marrow. Many conditions can affect the bones, joints, and tissues that make up the skeletal system. Some happen as a result of a disease or injury. Others develop due to wear and tear as you get older, as I'm finding out. Conditions that may affect the skeletal system can include arthritis. Age, injury, and medical conditions such as Lyme disease can lead to arthritis, which is a painful wearing down of joints. A fracture, a disease, a tumor, or trauma can put stress on a bone and cause it to break. Osteosarcoma is a cancer that forms in the bones that can cause tumors that may weaken and break bones. Sprains and tears. Age, disease, and trauma can cause connective tissue to overstretch and tear. Bone loss caused by not getting enough calcium can lead to fragile and brittle bones, known as osteoporosis. Osteoblasts are cells that form bone tissue. These osteoblasts can synthesize and secrete bone matrix and participate in the mineralization of bone to regulate the balance of calcium and phosphate ions in developing bone. Now, osteoblasts are derived from osteoprogenitor cells. The osteoclast is a monocyte-derived cell responsible for degradation of mineralized connective tissue, cartilage, or bone. Osteoclasts are specialized multinucleated giant cells that resorb bone. This is carried out primarily due to remodeling of extracellular matrix. Osteoclasts are derived from monocyte fusion and have from about 2 to 12 nuclei per cell site. Resistance training increases bone mass and strength and may decrease the likelihood of developing osteoporosis. Wolff's Law is the idea that natural, healthy bones will adapt and change to adapt to the stress that is subjected to. For example, if the bones are subjected to heavier and heavier loads, they will naturally reconstruct themselves to accommodate that load. Wolff's Law was created by the German anatomist and surgeon Julius Wolff in the 19th century. It is part of bone theory that explains how bones typically respond to stress. It marks the adaptive changes that bones can make internally to become stronger and stronger in order to resist strain. Wolff's law also applies in the inverse case. In the inverse case, Wolff's law of bone theory explains the effect of decreased weight on the bone as the bone becomes less dense and weaker. In severe cases, a drastic reduction in weight on bones can require a hip or bone replacement. Often people think about Wolff's law as a way to prevent injuries. Thicker bones break less often, but by Wolff's law, doing resistance training regularly to thicken your bones, it will both prevent and help heal injuries. Bone can actually get stronger in a number of ways. Bones can get stronger due to changes in bone geometry that redistribute impact or alter bone mass. In addition to bearing weight and keeping us upright, bones also help attach the various ligaments, tendons, and organs to each other. They function as a calcium reservoir. Throughout your life, your bones change shape and grow while also performing all of the previous listed functions. Your bones change throughout your stages of life and depending on how great of a strain they are under. However, the way that they change and grow is not always the same. It mostly depends on what sort of strain they must hold and what angle. After you turn 25 years of age, it is especially important that you focus on exercising in ways that will help you to slow down naturally occurring bone loss. Women are also more likely to lose more bone mass than men. For example, by the age of 80, a woman can lose up to 50% of her bone mass, whereas a man might lose around 18%. This is why women are more susceptible to osteoporosis than men. Wolff's law can often be applied to the treatment of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis happens when your bone mass deteriorates to a point where your bones become severely weak and easily fracture. Weight-bearing physical activity has been proven, especially in both preventing and treating osteoporosis. However, in osteoporosis treatment, gentle and careful exercise are best. Another application of Wolff's law can occur after you fracture or break a bone. Much of the physical therapy for healing broken bones follow Wolff's law and posits that controlled stress to bones will lead to the best healing and strengthening. However, it is important that you engage in this form of exercise under the supervision of a qualified therapist. Ligaments and tendons are both made of connective tissue and both can be torn or overstretched, but they differ in function. Ligaments attach one bone to another. Tendons attach a muscle to a bone. Both, however, are essential to proper body mechanics. Ligaments appear as crisscross bands that attach bone to bone and help stabilize joints. For example, the anterior cruciate ligament that you see here, or ACL, attaches the thigh bone to the shin bone, stabilizing the knee joint. Tendons located at each end of the muscle attach muscle to bone. Tendons are found throughout the body, from the head and neck all the way down to the feet. The Achilles tendon is the largest tendon in the body. It attaches the calf muscle to the heel bone. The rotator cuff tendons help your shoulder rotate forward and backward. You can think of ligaments as rope with a series of tough intertwined cords that bind bones. Ligaments also have some elastic fibers that allow the joint to move, but not so much that it moves beyond its capacity. The knee joint, for instance, has 4 major ligaments, one on each side of the knee and 2 that run diagonally across the front and back of the kneecap. These ligaments help stabilize the knee and keep it from moving too far to the left or right, forward or backward. Tendons are also tough cords, but they have a little more give than ligaments. As a muscle contracts, the attached tendons pull the bone into movement. Think of what happens to your bicep when you bend your elbow. Tendons also help absorb the impact muscles take as they spring into action. And here are my references. Thank you for listening. I look forward to talking with you again. Have a great day.